here you have it's called Vermont Public Service Board, has hearings where we get notified the day or the day before of them. They're poorly attended. Nobody knows the ramifications. They hear smart grid, which makes sense. I mean,
sounds smart.
Yeah, and that's all. And if you look up anybody's talk about smart meters, they'll talk a lot about smart grid and they'll say almost nothing about smart meters. Because it's very questionable. And do we go wireless? Do we go wired? What are the ramifications? What about health? What about security? Those issues remain open or remain very bad. And then this opt-out policy, why should we be paying to opt out if we were never asked to opt in? I mean, so it's very controversial. Yeah. And it's already happening. I mean, we're not talking about stuff that's yet to come. Smart meters are being installed while we talk.
Reading in the pilot study done in Connecticut, the people in the pilot study were actually paid to participate, and they were gung-ho, they were enthusiastic. They bought, the appliances, they bought the devices to help them measure, what their usage was. But that's a very small subset, and even those people did not realize any tremendous benefits, but you can imagine the cost if you were to replace all of your appliances, and also to purchase these devices. And very few people can afford to do that or will want to do that, will want to micromanage, their electricity consumption. So it hasn't been shown to pay off, and in fact in California there's a lot of evidence coming out of just exorbitant bills, bills that have gone up 20-30%, and then some meters that have just malfunctioned and really gone haywire and overcharged people. We're now 4 years into this, I would say, from when the early ones were deployed. So there really is evidence now of harm, as well as lack of savings. And, the more information that comes out, you're wondering, especially in our situation, since we're on the brink of this. Now, I don't doubt that these corporations, that CVPS, GMP, have probably already bought the meters. It's probably in their minds a done deal. But that doesn't mean for us, as residents and citizens of our state, that we have to sit back and just say, oh, okay, so in your mind it's a done deal, but it's not, in mine and in many other people. We feel like this is our opportunity to stop this, even if it is the 11th hour, even if we're on the threshold of this installation. It's such a bad deal for Vermonters, and the travesty is that so few people know about it, as you mentioned earlier, as I'm sure you've heard from everyone. Still, the majority of people you talk to about this issue haven't heard about it, don't know anything about it.
And it's not really one of those things that you can't talk about per se, but it's one of those things that people don't even know about. I mean, I think if you ask the average person about smart meters, they would look at you kind of funny and say, what are you talking about? And perhaps you can relate your first experience about hearing about it. That was very interesting.
Okay, well, one of the things I'll back up on is there's two concepts when it comes to smart meters. There's smart grid and there's smart meter. And most of the power companies will talk about smart grid because you can't argue with that. A smart grid is just what it sounds like. It's basically a way that the power companies can better manage their own utilities. The problem is they're implemented with a smart meter. And that's these meters on the outside of everybody's home where they used to have these wheels turn around when they had before the advent of these smart meters. And that's where one of the things between a safe and good implementation of a smart grid is the meter that's chosen. And that's kind of how I got involved in it. And I first got notice of the fact that there was a hearing about smart meters in Brattleboro on the day of the event. And I was saying earlier that when I went there, it was myself and one other person. So, I mean, it kind of seemed to me that it was almost by design that there was such a late notice that nobody knew about it. In fact, everybody statewide complained about no notification. And every other city, including Burlington, only had 2 or 3 people show up at these things because they knew about it. To this day, nobody knows about it.
How aware is the Vermont legislature about this problem, or the governor, or is there any talk? Is there any opposition to this? What's the political landscape look like?
Yes, our group, StopsMeters.org, some individuals in Manchester have approached the governor, gave him the SAGE report, gave him Vermonters Against Smart Meters, a compilation of a lot of articles on health and and just actual, where these meters have been deployed, leading to fires and, fried electronics, and just from all fronts of why, exorbitant cost, why this is a negative thing. But apparently he seems to feel that this is a kind of a futuristic vision, that he doesn't want Vermont to be left behind. And the thing is that really using the current technology, these meters are already obsolete in that they can't incorporate renewable sources of energy. They can't incorporate solar or wind. So why not wait until we can have a version of these meters that is safe and that can actually, help us towards the goal of, getting off of foreign oil, of oil dependency, where we can implement renewable sources.
And what the game is, and most people don't realize this, is it's really, sadly say, all about money. Because if you look at what's behind the smart grid, it's smart appliances. And the average household has 15 different appliances that can all be wired with Wi-Fi. Mm-hmm. Your TV, your dishwasher, your refrigerator, your air conditioner. You can go on and on with all the things that can theoretically be wired so that your smart meter can shut them off, turn them on, start them, and that's kind of where it's going. So everything about this whole smart meter technology is based on the concept of a smart grid that no one can argue about, but everything else is absolutely brand new. Mm-hmm. And it's all on the come of what the power companies are being told is going to be happening with these multi-billion-dollar conglomerates, GE and I mean every major company is involved with the smart meter limit.
The subsidizing is $69 million, and I think that's matching. It's about half.
Matching costs, yes.
Yeah, and I believe Sandia National Labs has also put in another $15 million.
Right. CVPS was awarded $30 million of that $69 million toward their build-out. So they'll have to come up with, their investors come up with the other $30 million.
Well, I mean, the whole idea is that abusing power when it's the cheapest, when it's the most infrequently used. So if you're away at work, no sense having your air conditioner going. When you come back 15 minutes before you arrive, and call up on your cell and turn your air conditioner on and not waste all that energy. So that, I mean, the premise kind of makes sense. Mm-hmm. And then they're coming out with this usage billing. That's the other thing. Your power company is actually going to tell you when you use your energy, and they're actually going to have peak billing. They're basically going to come up with a system that charges you more for energy use when it's being used at a time when all the energy is being used, and less. What kind of moron can't realize that, geez, it may be cheaper to do my laundry at 3 o'clock in the morning than it is at 3 o'clock in the afternoon? I mean, it doesn't take a smart meter and exposure to radioactive stuff to be able to make that determination. I mean, anybody with a head can do that.
They are not doing it in Connecticut because partly for the reason that they have sort of an early generation of not technically smart meters, not using RF radiation, but they have digital meters that have an extended life of another 15 years. So in other words, it's very wasteful to change out those meters that are relatively new, to put in a whole new system. And then from their pilot study, the gains were so insignificant that they simply did not feel it was worth doing.
Every place where they've been implemented has been fraught with all kinds of problems. Higher bills, fire hazards. They interfere with pacemakers and other electronic devices and people that have baby monitors. And I mean, they've been actually, I think in California where they've installed, I don't know what the number is, but they've installed quite a few times. There's over 3,000 registered complaints of users that were ready to go to court. In one county, they actually stopped installing them because they were actually causing fires and doing other things.
I did talk to a couple of CVPS workers about maybe about 2 months ago, and they said at that time that in Bennington they were intending to start deployment like very early January. Well, I think that's since been rolled back, pushed back, but that they were actually, they said they couldn't get rid of the CVPS workers fast enough, and they were going to bring in temporary crews to do the installation of these meters. And that's been done in other places, like in parts of California and Glendale. I was doing some research and where they bring in people that aren't even trained and they pay less, just these crews of, sort of subcontractors or something to deploy these meters. And then there's problems. That leads to fires. They're badly installed.
So have there been cases of people becoming sick from these smart meters?
The only thing that, there are people that have what's called electrosensitivity, where they're just sensitive to that kind of thing, and they have headaches, and they have nausea, and they have, their memory gets impaired, and so they have subtle things like that. And it's a very small, I don't know what the overall population is. But if you look at studies that are out there that are based on animal studies of cows, for instance, that are located near wires or located near cell towers, the incidence of miscarriage, the incidence of contaminated milk, the incidence of things that are absolutely scary. What happens where those things are placed is wildlife tends to get away from them, which should be a pretty obvious sign that it might not be that great for you.
First of all, I don't know why the utility companies should get the benefit of the doubt on this. Like, why don't they prove that it's safe, But in fact, so many studies have shown that this kind of radiation at very low levels is unsafe, particularly for children, particularly for women, pregnant women, or people with underlying health problems,
What about environmental
immune.
too, like fish?
Oh,
and
exactly. Especially bees and
wildlife,
birds
birds.
and because they've shown
trees.
Yeah, trees. I mean, it's not healthy really for any living organism and for our environment, which is a big concern. Like what gives us the right to simply pollute? And you have to look at this as a form of pollution, which is hard for people to do because it's not a black smoke and it's not. You can't smell it. You can't see it. It's just invisible, but it's very much there. And then there's also that small segment of the population that's very sensitive to this, and really is made ill by it. And I guess the theory is that as this type of radiation increases, I mean, more and more people will, in all likelihood, become sensitive to it. Because at a certain point, your body is like, that's enough.
No one can say quantitatively, but ask for proof that they're safe. No one will touch that.
Right.
So when you go to your power company meetings, or you go to these forums where you can get engaged with your public utility official, have them prove to you that these emissions are safe. They can't. They'll say, well, they comply with the FCC standards, which, as you know, only relate to thermal radiation, not non-thermal. No one can make that statement. No one can make that claim because it's not true.
There is a very large and growing body of science that it's not just about, somebody getting a little headache, that it really is being linked to many kinds of illnesses, many cancers, and it's affecting our DNA. So this is a species issue. And it's affecting the crop pollinators. It's a species issue. That's the strongest thing you can say, is that in the end, the chronic exposures to this kind of radiation is degrading the DNA, and we are sacrificing future generations. And we're also sacrificing current generations and the children. We see what's happening.
Smart meters and wireless telephones aren't the only things emitting radiation at us. The sun does it every day. This week on Other News, we're going to talk about solar weather, which is the kind of weather that we don't usually think about. Most of the time, the sun is relatively quiet, but about every 11 years, we reach what they call a solar maximum. During a solar maximum, the sun gets very active, and instead of just sitting there emitting its usual amount of radiation, we get sunspots, coronal holes through which a great deal of solar wind escapes. The solar wind contains ionized particles and radiation. And then they have this wonderful thing called a coronal mass ejection, or CME. A CME is when there's a huge explosion on the sun, and a big chunk of millions and millions and billions of particles of plasma, they call it, is hurled in some direction. And most of the time it is not hurled at Earth, so that's a good thing. But once in a while it is, and when it does, it hits our atmosphere, and it actually gets into something they call the magnetosphere, which is an outer ring of our atmosphere. And it causes problems here on Earth. Some of the problems that it causes include, well, increased ionization in the Earth's atmosphere, but disruption to things like the power grid, GPS systems, satellites, any kind of network, wireless networks. All these things are affected. And when I say they are disrupted, I mean there's the potential there for them to actually be fried. And so some scientists have started to really worry. What they're thinking is, what if we have another solar storm on the level of the 1859 storm? What would happen? And of course what they're thinking is that it would destroy life as we know it. So they've been meeting in they've been having very high level meetings all over the place, but to talk about the solar storms and what could happen to the power grid and what could happen to society and a whole lot of other things that they're concerned about. These meetings aren't just little meetings. They have members of the military, the Department of Energy, FEMA, Congress. There's a lot of groups that are doing this, and they're having these tabletop exercises, and then they're leaving petrified. One attendee of one of these conferences described an 1859 level event today as being the worst disaster society could imagine. Some fear that the real radiation emergency could happen after a solar storm if the power grid were to be blacked out for an extended period of time. Ever since Fukushima, we're a lot more aware of what can happen without power at a nuclear plant. Even if we get through the solar maximum, there's yet another twist to this story. There's a scientist, his name is Frank Hill of the National Solar Observatory, and what he's saying is that according to all of the measures that he has used to determine what future solar cycles are going to look like, we're actually heading into what may be an extended lull, so that the sun may be very quiet for decades to come. It seems like the solar maximum would be a time for there to be, incredible radiation coming in because you've got all these explosions. But in fact, it's not the case. You get as much or more radiation during the solar minimums. If all this has you intrigued and you want to follow along, first of all, don't look at the sun with your naked eye. Instead, go to a website called spaceweather.com where you will see graphs and charts and alerts and really fabulous pictures of solar storms and auroras. It's a lot of fun. Hopefully we won't get zapped by the big one, but better to know about it than not. Till next time.
One's bad enough, but what about a multi-unit dwelling where you might have 12, 20 of these things?
Broadcasting.
Yeah, on the outside of a wall, and 11 inches on the other side, you've got a baby's crib.
Right.
There's the studies that show that one already exceeds the emission standards, but when you have a multi-unit or a senior complex or something like that, where they're marginalized anyway, and they're not 200-pound, 6-foot men. What happens when they're in decline or they're in growth mode, and you suddenly have zillions of these meters on the other side of their wall?
I have some friends that live in condominiums that have banks of meters, on the other side of a friend of mine, other side of our living room wall. And there's sort of vague assurances that they will put in some sort of protective material, but then in the same breath they say, but we can't interfere with other, customers, meters functioning, etc. So that's another vague, kind of undecided, aspect of this, like how will, because that represents a huge threat. A number of people have talked to me about that.
There was an article in the New York Times recently about a Waldorf school in Silicon Valley, where it's a policy of the Waldorf schools to have it as low-tech as possible, no computers in the classroom. And many of the top technology R&D people from Silicon Valley send their children to the school, and it's very hard to get into this school. And some of them parents were quoted in the New York Times as saying, There's plenty of time to learn about computers and things later on. These are formative years. This is about my child learning other things, learning social skills. It's a lot about the brain developing, and it's not about the computers they can learn later. So that was really encouraging.
There's two key things to remember about radiation. It comes in two flavors, thermal and non-thermal. Thermal radiation is just what it says, it's heat. So, and that came out years ago. I think the last time was in 1969. That's how bad it is. But anyway, it was for like radar people that were doing radar and people that were working in cell towers and whatnot, where there was such a concentration of radio frequency radiation that actually heated their tissue, and they actually got burns from it. So the FCC was pulled in to establish guidelines on thermal radiation, and that's what exists. And that's what all the power companies are saying, well, it's well within FCC guidelines. The problem is there's absolutely no guidelines for non-thermal radiation. For cell phones and all that sort of stuff, there's nothing. The FCC has got no guidelines, and everybody's saying, be cautious, but we don't know. There's just not enough evidence. Now, what is the name of that? The World Health Organization just completed a study where they said there's a causal relationship between brain cancer and cell phone usage. The other thing that's really scary is these FCC thermal radiation standards were based on a 200-pound, 6-foot male. Think about in vitro, and think about babies, and think about, think about constant cell division and DNA and all those things that are happening 24 hours a day in an infant, and what kind of subtle energy they could well be sensitive to that's not covered anywhere by anything.
There's the work of Nicholas Carr, who is a journalist who wrote the book called The Shallows, about the impact of all this information flowing at us, and is so easily accessible, the velocity of information, and he looked at all the neuroscience and behavioral science on what is it doing to our brains. And it's changing the way our brain works, just like when we first had maps. We went to mankind looked at the world differently when all of a sudden they could see a map, or when we went from the oral tradition to books. I think different parts of the brain got more developed and less developed. And in the case of this internet use, the parts of the brain that have to do with focus and with the ability to form relationship are declining. It's at the expense of those that were overdeveloping other parts of the brain that are helping with the multitasking, and we're evidently, according to what he said about the science, we're deceiving ourselves into thinking that we're being more productive, because the error rate, we might be faster, but the error rate is much, much higher. So when I heard him speak recently, and he was describing all the symptoms that people have from excessive internet exposure, they were all with the same symptoms as electrosensitivity. They were the fragmented, difficulty to focus, difficulty to concentrate, memory issues. And so it would be very interesting to really look at the brain and see, well, are those symptoms actually happening when you have a wired Ethernet cord? Is it that there's a large volume of information that's now accessible to us, and the speed of it all, or is it the Wi-Fi that's causing these problems in the brain? The distinction needs to be made. So
there's a whole other thing in security, because if you're blasting like a cell phone blast, you're chirping your personal information, your billing information. Somebody can do identity theft. So you're blasting, and people can find out when you're there, when you're not there, when to break in, because your usage of electricity goes up and down based on whether you're there or not, or your lights are off. So all that information is being blasted continuously, 24 hours a day.
And know if you're not home. I think it might, open someone up to getting burgled. A lot of issues with that, but also marketing this data.
Data mining, right?
Yeah, data mining is another thing that people find out that all the time. And somebody mentioned an interesting point. Like, there's so many documents often you sign now about privacy. That when with doctors or whatever it might be, And yet, so on the one hand, you're being warned of your privacy rights and do you want to share this information? On the other hand, here's something that represents a huge, I think, transgression of our rights, as individuals and what's considered private. It's just a bad technology. It's just also cyber security, I guess, is another big issue. I know the meeting in Vernon, there was a gentleman there talking about MIT had done a study and showed that this was very easy to hack into and just disable.
We talked about the security issues. The things that are really scary is what could the potential of invasions of privacy. There's nothing to prevent Homeland Security from attaching other devices on your smart meter or extracting information, because you will have a personal signature of every appliance in your house. That information can be accessed by the police, and they can do whatever they want with it. So if you're growing marijuana and your grow lights go on and there's a surge in power, they can track that, and they can they can take action on things that come from a smart meter that they wouldn't have otherwise. They can monitor other activities. Who knows if they're wiretapping now, who knows what the extent of the invasions could be. And what would prevent them, for security reasons, to say, well, he's a domestic terrorist and we're going to turn his power off. And they can reach through from Homeland Security because every power company gives way to them. The power companies say, well, your information is private and we will not pass it on to other income-related things, but they don't say anything about the police officials. So, if you have Homeland Security or if you have questionable police practices going on and you become targeted for whatever reason, the things that get scary to me are the no-fly list and all the people that have been drawn in so close, supposedly, by these pure security efforts. And one person, one book I was reading said his 85-year-old grandmother was prevented from flying because she was on the no-fly list because he wrote a book, critical of. So there's nothing to say that in the wrong hands, and more we're seeing in the wrong hands when kids going to college get sprayed with pepper spray lined up. Who knows where this is going to end? But the indications certainly aren't good. This phenomenon is happening worldwide. Right. It's not happening just in America. Yeah. They're trying to smart grid, smart meter the world. That's why it's a big gold rush. You're talking about companies, these multinational corporations that are just salivating. It's like it's like flesh thrown into a piranha tank. They're all trying to rise to the top and be first in line for all this money.
But I think it's this incredible. I think profit is kind of calling the shots here, and at the expense of health, because it's inconvenient to look at the health implications.
It would seem in Vermont, though, that they're not going to profit very much. So why would they do it here?
I agree with you. I agree. Unless they've sort of locked into it, unless they've invested heavily in it, and it's like in
or
their.
They're getting some other kind of money from.
Well, there is
Green
Mountain Power and Central Vermont have merged, and they're controlled by Quebec Hydroelectric, which supplies our power. And up in Montreal and Quebec right now, they're fighting this same fight about smart meters, where they're forcing the people to have smart meters put on their homes. So it doesn't take a rocket science to figure out if the managing company, Quebec Hydroelectric, is pushing smart meters, and CDPS and Green Mountain Power likewise will have to push smart meters as well. The ultimate money, this $69 million, is going to go to Quebec Hydroelectric by definition, and the Americans that are right now reading smart meters are going to be out of a job. Yeah. So we're subsidizing a Canadian company to put a smart meter on your house and to fire a Vermonter.
Yeah, and actually that represents a huge savings for these companies. Just getting rid of the the meter readers. Just the meter readers. That in and of itself could be the main motive for this whole project.
The salary was $1.6 million per year for the meter readers, plus the extra cost of running the vehicles, the gasoline. So there's a tremendous savings for the power company to eliminate that part on their cost savings. But that also affects the economy. Little mom and pop stores that sell the sandwich to the meter reader, or the local gas station that supplies the gasoline to that vehicle, or the local dealer that sells the truck to the power company. So
and that reader's family.
Exactly. So everybody's going to be affected.
He's
It's,
out of a job, or she's out of a job.
everybody's going to be affected.
Here we are in probably the highest unemployment ever, and we're putting all the meter readers out of work. I mean, we kind of put that aside, but there's an employment side to this thing, which a lot of people, they're not high-end jobs, but they're maybe the only thing a lot of these people can get.
Right.
And a lot of them are out of work. So the whole thing seems to me, if they want to check it out, nobody argues with the smart grid. Put a pilot study together, put 5,000 homes on a grid, and test a wireless mode and a wire-based mode, and see what the ramifications are. And then go. I mean, it seems to me it just makes a whole lot more sense, rather than just blitzing the state of Vermont and surrounding us all with these things. But I think what's happening is smart meters are plan A of a Wi-Fi world.
I think, maybe, for all we know, a lot of the politicians and legislators may be very unaware of the health aspect to this. I mean, it's kind of, again, I think it's that sort of mindset where you think, okay, everybody's got cell phones and, it's ubiquitous, and what's a little more? But this is more than a little more, because it really represents a very extensive layer, added to the environment. And I think that's what people instinctively are so upset about, that it's not of our choice. It's something imposed. It's invasive. There are issues, it's the RF radiation, and then privacy. I mean, a lot of people are really upset over the privacy aspect of it, that these meters will allow, your use of electricity basically will show what you're doing, what you're using, where you are, if you're home or not, with people that are able to hack into the system, they'd ascertain all that information.
And the thing that's really scary to me, and I haven't found any answer to, you have this wireless option where you put a smart meter on somebody's home and it wirelessly communicates. See, the communication to your smart devices is one part of it, to what's going on inside the house. But once it gets there, how does your smart meter communicate back to the power company? And that's where it really gets scary, and that's where the danger is, right? Because on each meter, they chirp, they send off a signal, as frequently as every minute, and as infrequently as once every 4 hours. It really depends on how much data they're collecting. But at any rate, these things chirp, and they chirp in a wireless mode, meaning they just send a radio frequency out, a mesh network, it's called. And what a mesh network allows you to do is you have certain meters on certain pieces are receivers. They actually receive this radiation that's going out, and they collect it all for up to 500 homes, and then they blast that to a telephone pole where they have a receiver that then blasts it to another cell tower or something that ends up back to the power company. So what's happening, because we're going with a wireless world, is this radiation disseminates out. If you did wireless or wired-based technology from your meter to the there's a wire that goes. So all this goes away. There's no radiation. It's like a shotgun versus a rifle. I mean, basically, if you have a wired technology from your smart meter to the pole, they just have a little wire that carries that signal, and all these things go away.
It makes no sense. It's actually, the wires already exist for telephones and other wiring is there. So you're not incurring any extra expense by using what's there. You're eliminating the RF, radio frequency radiation piece of this by using the existing wires. It's been done that way. It's been done safely that way. You still have, the issue with choosing wireless in this rural, hilly, mountainous terrain is that by necessity you'd have to have much stronger signals for the transmission of data.
Stronger radiation.
Yeah, exactly. And the mesh network is the system they've chosen, which means that the meters actually chatter between themselves, passing information back and forth, so that the actual data from one meter to the collection point is only 10% of what is being sent. The other 90% is chatter from other meters. So that an individual's meter, the bulk of all the RF emissions will be all signals being passed from other meters. And then depending where you are in the outlay of these meters, if you're closer to the collection point, like your meter might bear the brunt of the transmissions. And I don't know how anybody would know that. And that's also a whole issue of like how they're being regulated and who's done testing on them and who's done testing since they've been deployed in real life situations, which is one of the reports that people in our group that are active about this, the SAGE report, which was commissioned back in November 11th of 2011. And she makes mention of the Richard Tell report. He's an industry expert, well regarded. And his report is just full of like, well, we don't know, we can posit, we can guess, because it's never been, actually deployed in a fully functioning human setting with all the variables that one encounters. So she looks at his report and basically agrees and says there are many, many loopholes. You really cannot safely predict that even these meters will conform to FCC guidelines, which by most medical expert standards are completely obsolete, the FCC guidelines, because they're based on thermal ionizing heating of tissue, and we're talking about much, much lower level frequency, radiation.
And don't these meters have more radiation than a cell phone?
No, far less actually.
They have less?
Right now.
They emit less?
Yeah. But the thing nobody knows about, what happens when you get 15 smart appliances communicating nonstop to them?
Mm-hmm.
What happens to and then what happens to me it sounds just like the whole smoking debacle. Remember when the CEO stood up and said tobacco is not addictive and it's not, and they all held their hand on the Bible. And
right.
This whole smart meter debacle sounds just like that to me. That the power companies are saying low level radiation is not going to hurt you, and and secondhand smoke is just like secondhand radiation. What happens now when you go for a walk and you may be vigilant and have no smart meter on your house, but you're in a development that there's 3,000, and it's not just radiation. There was a wonderful special put out by NBC, quite a few years ago, that talked about the body of evidence, and it talked about people being legally exposed. In other words, the air, the water, and the soil quality. Not one chemical was in legal violation of anything. And that's what the EPA and the FDA and all these people monitor. We're making sure that we're within legal guidelines from all this stuff. But what nobody studies is the cumulative impact of legal guidelines.
Mm.
And what happened was they actually did blood tests and urinalysis of 9 women or 9 people, and they found that they were just loaded with toxins. Even though all these federal agencies made sure that no one company was emitting more than the legal dose of any one chemical, the cumulative impact of all of this world of toxins was a very chemical-ridden. The numbers were staggering. Something like 135 toxins that cause cancer, 100 and something that cause brain dysfunction, miscarriage. That's what's in us. This whole smart meter debacle and radiation is the same thing. And to me, it's very akin to secondhand smoke. Remember, smoking was first denied as being hazardous, then and nobody could deny that it was extremely hazardous to your health. Then secondhand smoke came along, and I said, that's not an issue.
Yeah.
Well, now, I think this low-level radiation is exactly the same scenario. They're going to find out, who knows when, that cumulative exposure to low-level radiations from the time you're born, basically, to the time you die, it's going to have all kinds of ramifications.
I think what we need to do in Vermont is really wake people up, really get active, tell people, that now is the time to let your voice be heard. Talk to your local senators and representatives.
I'm saying people should take it upon themselves to get informed. You can go to the internet. The internet's a wonderful resource for all kinds of information on smart grids and smart meters. You can look at what your power company says about it, and you can look up beyond that. So my main message is to get informed. Now, I happen to be doing a public forum for it, but I'm certainly not going to have all the answers. I'm not going to have a tiny percentage of people should take it upon themselves to find out this stuff on their own, just like you've done.
Yeah.
They're trying to sponsor a forum to get the word out. And the only hope we have is an informed population. We've got to become a mass of critical thinkers, not a mass of dummies that continues to do whatever we're told is safe. we cannot trust what we're told is safe anymore.
There's a lot of information about these meters, and I suggest people go to our website, which is stopsmeters.org, go to our Facebook page, which is excellent, has a lot of, breaking stories on what's happening. We're going to be picketing next week on the 19th before the CBPS presentation in Bennington at the Bennington Free Library. So I suggest people just get active and write letters and tell other people, get everybody to opt out, because if enough people opt out, then it may not even be a viable project to undertake. So I think that's really key. That's the message. Opt out. Vote with your feet. Say no, no smart meter here. We're entitled to safety and privacy.
The Vermont Public Service Board was kind of adamant about was having some sort of an opt-out program, which basically says, if I don't want one of these smart meters, if I have concerns one way or the other, whether it's security or radiation, health or security or whatnot, I can opt not to have it installed. They really feel this will be part of the law. However, it cost me $10 a month to opt out.
It'll cost $10 a month.
And to me, what was bothersome to me is, why the hell should we pay to opt out when we've never been asked to opt in?
Mm-hmm.
I mean, that was kind of, it seems to me that they should be soliciting our input, but on the front end, and not saying if we don't like what they've decided, they're going to charge us $10 a month. I mean, it sounds, but that's the best. A lot of states don't even have that. You have to get them, or you're legally in violation.
Essentially, from this Freeman and Sullivan and Company analysis, benefit cost analysis for advanced metering, it's a lot of interesting